and let you take it away.
Okay, and my sound is good. Okay, great. Will I see people, or will you all just begin? How's it work?
I've got you as my main one now, so let me change this. Let's see. I think everyone's, yeah, it looks like people are on, so.
Okay, will I see people too? But
I don't know, that's your settings on your end.
okay, okay, got it, and got it. Okay, let's begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session this afternoon. My name is Karen Hill Anton, and the book cover you see here on the screen is my memoir, which was published about this time last year, just about a year ago. And the title of this seminar, I should just say a word that memoir is all in the writing, you get no credit for living. That's from V.S. Pritchett. I didn't say that, and it's something that I referenced as I was writing my memoir, and also in the presentation I did last year. This talk will be about 20-25 minutes, and the rest of the time I will set aside for your questions, and I hope they will be forthcoming, and I'd like to think that we're going to have a conversation and discussion that we will all benefit from. When I began writing my memoir, I didn't think about the reader. I simply had a story I wanted to write, but I learned from editors and published writers that I had to ask myself this question as I wrote: what's in it for the reader? Now, when I hear from readers that my story resonates with them, mirrors their experience, has parallels with their lives, reminds them of their own childhoods or marriages or travels or life in Japan, I know that I've been able to make associations. And this is really what every memoirist wants to do. Of course, you can answer the question, I'm writing for myself, which is fine. Then it must be assumed you are not interested in gaining a readership. If you are, I think it's important to start out believing that your story, one you are prepared to write and share with the world, is both compelling and engaging. To return to the title of this session, it's all in the writing, you get no credit for living. That's to say that even if you have a story that's full of pathos and adventure, if you do not write it in a way that draws in readers, you're not going to get credit for either having suffered the pathos or having had the adventures. To paraphrase my fellow presenter, Tom Baker, the task is to turn life experiences that are interesting to oneself, one's family and friends, into a memoir that's interesting to others. You can turn. Now, just to recap some of the really very basic points that we covered in the session last year, but also I will touch on these again in my talk today. Chronology in memoir differs from autobiography in that autobiography typically begins with when, where you were born, perhaps who you were born to, and under what circumstances. In memoir, you decide where the story you want to tell begins. In my memoir, I began with my teenage years, and I'm not even sure why, but probably because that's when I began to see myself as separate from my family, my circumstances. Something else you can do in memoir concerning chronology is telegraph. And again, for example, I tell something in my memoir on page 2 that doesn't actually happen until page 82. Regarding theme, you probably do not think of your life as having a theme, but memoir must have a theme to be a story and not just a chronicle of your life. After my memoir was published, I joined several memoir groups on Facebook. Easily, the majority of the books posted have as their theme alcoholism, addiction, abuse, depression, family dysfunction. If that is what you want to write about, then you have your theme. But if you're trying to capture a full life, you must come up with a theme to give your memoir coherence. I believe you will find the theme is revealed as you write. It is the thread that is woven throughout the work. It is what gives the readers a reason to turn the page. Structure is something you must impose. If you don't, it will be a ramble, and this is something we will return to again. The principal character is, of course, you. It's not based on you, it is you. Voice in memoir gives authority and may also target the audience you want to reach. Voice helps readers identify and connect with you. When it comes to include what to include, you can't include everything. You must choose, and I will give you some tips on how to choose. Detail is important for readers to see your story. Dialogue helps readers hear the speaker. Even if it's not exact, it's quite okay to create it. There's no reason to think that you will remember every exact word of dialogue. You, like most people, are not walking around with a recorder. You can make up dialogue. Of course, you're not making up a story, but the dialogue does not have to be exact. Real people, real scenes. You must do this to keep from resorting to writing fiction. And we'll return to this again. And regarding nuts and bolts, perhaps that'll come up in your questions. I don't know how many of you are writing memoirs, want to write memoirs, or planning to write memoirs, but we will begin with this question. What motivates you to write a memoir? If you've decided to write a memoir, no doubt you have a reason for doing so. And I don't know what that is, but I can imagine you think you have a story to tell that others would be interested in. You feel your life has been interesting and you'd like to share it in print. You've reached a certain age and you are taking stock of your life. If you are not preparing to write for the general public, then perhaps you're doing it as a legacy for your children or a tribute to your parents. I think there can be many reasons for wanting to write memoir, and that whatever your reason for doing it, it is a worthy undertaking. Many memoirs written and published are chronicles of shame and victimhood. And for example, centered around abuse and family dysfunction, as I've mentioned. And of course, it's fine to write about the dark side of life. In the end, if you've written a good book, both you and your readers will be satisfied. That said, I would caution anyone writing from a vantage point of self-pity and victimhood, from the desire for revenge or to get back at someone. If that's what drives you, I can only wonder if that's how you'd want to spend your time, because writing a memoir, of course, takes quite a bit of time. I don't want to discourage anyone, as you are free to write a memoir about any aspect of your life that you choose. However, I will say that even if your life has been hard, I think compassion, learned lessons, self-reflection, endurance, and the courage to get on with your life is what you want to impart to readers. It is what they will respond to and be grateful for. I think, in a word, you want to inspire them, but not in any way that you're writing, thinking that you're writing an inspirational memoir. But if that's your reader's takeaway, then that could be a good thing. One of the main things a memoirist does is impose narrative order. This is required to tell a story. Tangents will arise. Resisting going off on them is easier said than done. Memory touches memory, and the next thing you know, you weren't just in Malta having an espresso in a cafe, but the waiter who served you wore a shirt that had the same pattern as the skirt your best friend at university always wore, and the same colors your mother always chose for the curtains. And when your parents sold the house, upgrading to a much bigger house, but one you never liked, she insisted on taking those curtains, even though they were faded. As you see, you've now told the reader something that does not advance your narrative because it has nothing to do with your story. And I'm not saying that tangents are not interesting. Certainly many tangents can be. But if you do not avoid them, which takes discipline, you interrupt the narrative flow of your story. Wanting your story to have momentum, you will also want to avoid tangents and telling your story in vignettes. Your life has been varied with ups and downs, and you can't tell everything. You must choose. Part of this is in service to your story. The other part is the very practical concern of word limit. How many words and pages are considered best, meaning commercially viable? And this is something we can talk about in the question and answers. It's important to consciously choose. And how do you do that? How do you choose from your entire life what it is you're going to write about in your memoir? I think you would take those parts of your life that advance your story, that gets the reader from page 10 to 100, those things that enhance and highlight your theme, that shed light on your development and illustrate the challenges you've faced, demonstrate how you overcame or succumbed to those challenges. Show the things you've attempted, the failures and successes. In a word, you will want to include those meaningful experiences that ultimately define who you became and who you are. The story is the emotional experience that preoccupies the writer. This quote is from the memoirist Vivian Gornick. She goes on to say, "It is a single piece of awareness that is clarified only slowly for the writer. It is the wisdom one has arrived at, the thing one has come to say." These insights organize the writing. The emotional experience and the wisdom you impart in your writing are not contrivances. They arise and they will be evident to the reader in your writing. You're not just reporting facts. Your readers might not relate to "I lived in Tokyo," but will relate to "I lived in Tokyo, I was alone and lonely," because it's a universal experience and emotion. Not everything the memoirist imparts is wisdom. Not everything they tell has to be momentous. Some of our quiet, everyday experiences can also be part of the story we write. It's important to include the ordinary, which, written well, can have its own appeal and charm. It will give balance to your memoir and help tell your story. And just to say a word about humor, some memoirs, of course, are written to be a humorist. And I think if you think, well, I want to make my memoir humorous, you might also want to think about what is it humorists do, and are you good at doing it, and is that how you want to have humor included in your work? You do not have time or pages to waste. Your readers should know from your first words that they want to spend time with you, invest their time with you, find out what happened to you, go along with you on your life journey. This is where your skills as a writer will serve you well. And as a reader of good writing, you will want to return in memory or actually go back to those books that you felt had impact from the first page. In reading, you will ask yourself, what did the author do? Why was I interested? What made me think I wanted to spend time with him? Why did I care about her? You can draw readers in with details by making your writing vivid. Perhaps you have diaries or journals or notes, or just a good memory, and there is really no just in having a good memory. A memoirist would be fortunate to have a good memory. Of course, we are not going through our lives recording every detail, but in the reflective state of writing, you can go to that place where you actually see the details in a scene you are writing. Now, I gave this example before, and I will give it again because I think it illustrates the point about detail and giving the readers the picture of what it is you're writing about. In my memoir, I say that my father, from a poor family in the South, was a good cook. And when I wrote of the food he made, I didn't just say he made good Southern food, but that he never used a cookbook or measuring cups, and that he made cornbread and spoon bread, black-eyed peas, and he cooked collard greens in a big black iron pot that looked like a cauldron. Now, I also mentioned that a reader in Hokkaido, a man who's originally from South Carolina, wrote to me and said he felt he could taste my father's cooking. And I thought that was interesting since I never mentioned how the food tasted. But through the writing, he got the feeling that he could taste it. One way the memoirist hooks their readers from the first page is by convincing them you are a reliable narrator. You persuade readers by writing as honestly as possible. The reader must be persuaded the narrator is telling the truth. Regarding telling the truth, writers can get hung up with facts that just don't matter. For example, when I was writing my memoir, I would sometimes call out to my husband, when we drove from Tehran to the border of Afghanistan, did it take 9 hours or 10 hours? Doesn't matter, who cares? I didn't have those facts and I couldn't remember. It was more than 45 years ago. But I could tell readers about running out of money, about selling my coat so we could get the necessary Iranian money to buy exit visas, about my husband turning pale when it looked like we wouldn't be able to leave Iran, and about meeting the Iranian judge who helped us. Readers are also persuaded when it's clear who is telling the story. Of course it's you, but as the main character, you have to create yourself as a character for readers to be able to fully experience who you are. Your writing must give a clear picture of who is speaking. You as the speaker must come into focus and be defined. You want readers to see and hear you. Of course, you shouldn't exaggerate, but you also do not want to be too modest, presenting yourself as just average. Remembering you're not a celebrity, readers will always be asking, why am I interested, or why would I be interested in reading this person's memoir? You can establish credibility by not coming across as too average. Remember, you're not just telling your readers, I was born here, I went there, and I did that. Your story will engage readers when they can relate, and they relate to struggle, to joy, to being afraid, resilient, happy, unhappy, vulnerable, making mistakes, all those things that make us human. The memoirist must show a bit of self-curiosity, which arises out of detachment and distance. You actually have to stop and step back and look at yourself, examine and question the things you've done, the moves you made. This examination is what gives your memoir depth. Self-curiosity is not navel-gazing. Your readers will not benefit from this. Here again is when you would ask yourself, what's in it for the reader? This may sound like a conundrum because, of course, the memoirist is looking inward. If you weren't, you wouldn't be writing a memoir. But you're also telling a story, and you must never lose sight of this. Naturally, you cannot have depth without honesty, and you've got to be prepared for this, and if not, then it probably would be best if you were writing fiction. I think honesty and the willingness to disclose something about yourself in memoir is what readers respond to. I do not believe that honesty requires you to invite readers into your bed or to tell or disclose anything about your life that you do not choose to. Your readers will appreciate honesty, and you will be rewarded by the associations they make with you. And while they may not easily detect dishonesty, I cannot see how it would help in telling your story. Inventing the Truth is the title of William Zinter's book on memoir writing. Of course, this statement, inventing the truth, does not mean you are making up a story. Your writing gains power through imagination, and that can be expressed with detail, knowledge, keen observation, wisdom, experience, recreating dialogue. Let the writer take over and use your skills as a writer to evoke time, place, situation, circumstance, speech, feelings, emotions, colors, weathers, people, all those things that will bring your reader in. Again, this quote is from William Zinter. He goes on to say, memoir is how we make sense of who we are, who we once were, what values and heritage shaped us. Our lives are not always so structured, certainly mine wasn't, but if you do not impose structure, your memoir will be a ramble. Structure is what makes the memoir literature rather than a chronicle. Structure is what distinguishes the finished work from the draft. You may not be as old as I am, but I know there are no teenagers here. And you have a lot of experience. And it would be great to think that you can sit down and just write and your story will fall into place. That just will not happen. I just like to tell my own experience with trying to work with structure. When I began writing my memoir, I showed it to a friend who is I would say a successful author and memoirist. And she read the manuscript and said it was great. And she said it lacked structure. And I said, okay. And then I worked with a developmental editor, and she essentially told me the same thing. You've got a great story, but your memoir lacks structure. I didn't pay attention to either one of them. I just patted myself on the back regularly as I wrote my memoir, and just reminded myself that they said that my story was great. And that buoyed me and kept me going until I thought I was finished with the memoir. But in the end, I had to return to what they said and to the very hard job of putting structure into my memoir. And I can say that that's when the hard part of writing it became really hard. Lastly, and first of all, you are the real person here. Some of you may write fiction, and if you've written a first novel, there's a good chance the main character is similar in significant ways to you. Still, you'd be telling the truth and saying the character is not you, but one you created. The main character in Memoir is different in this unmistakable way. It's not a made-up character based on you. It is you. You should neither romanticize nor avoid telling the truth. I can't tell you how many times people have told me since my memoir has been published. Readers have contacted me telling me they would very much like to write a memoir. And I encourage anyone to do it, because I think it's such a, what can I say, revelatory and worthwhile experience. But most often they will tell me that they don't feel that they could be honest and that they could really tell their true story. And I can understand that. I feel that that there can be many things that you don't want to tell, and of course you do not have to tell them in a memoir. But if you're holding back, if you're going over parts in the memoir that you would just rather not deal with, you might find that it will be evident to your readers. I know it was evident to my editor, the developmental editor I worked with. There was a part I just really did not want to write about, and I just sort of wrote around it and over it and under it and hinted at it, but I thought, well, that's enough. But she could very clearly see that it was missing, and she encouraged me to write. Of course, she couldn't make me do it. And in the end, I did, and I'm glad that I was able to write about that. I feel it made the memoir more complete. Everyone knows people are not one-dimensional. An example, and as I've given this before, in my memoir, I wrote about going through counseling. And of course, I didn't have to write about counseling. No one's going to know if I don't tell them. I could easily have written the memoir as, myself as a strong, capable woman, the heroine of my own story. And readers would be none the wiser about my experience. But of course, going through counseling or therapy is something many people can relate to, and perhaps they could benefit from learning about my experience. And I think that it can be, almost tempting to show oneself and one's memoir, as I say, as the heroine of your own story. I could have easily have made it appear that I toughed out every tough situation on my own. And of course, that was not the case. Regarding real people, I have to ask, are your parents alive? Do you have siblings? What are you willing to write about them for the public? I don't think you can write a memoir while thinking someone is looking over your shoulder, but you want to be careful and considerate about writing about others. Or at the very least, I think you must be prepared to pay the consequences of hurting family and friends, exposing what others might not want to expose, ruining relationships. To finish, I will say that I have a husband and 4 adult children, and they were able to read my manuscript before it was published. And if they had objected to anything in it, I would have taken it out. Happily, and most fortunately, they did not object to anything. So everything that's in it has been, I would say, received their stamp of approval. So that's all I will speak about in my talk to you. And now I open it to you and all of your questions. And as I say, I hope they're forthcoming because, well, this will be a discussion, and not only you, I will continue to learn from what we talk about here today.
And it's so nice to see you.
Oh, Karen Lee, so what are you?
It's great to see you. So I was wondering if you could speak a little more about adding dialogue to your memoir, because I'm kind of struggling with how I might do that. Because the memoir that I'm trying to write is really overall about a kind of solo journey in many different places. So I don't have one other character that's traveling along with me the whole time. So I'm not really sure how much dialogue the reader would expect or how I should handle that.
All right, that's interesting. I think you have given yourself quite a difficult task, because if it's only about you and you know, no other people show up in it. But even if you were traveling, what about conversations with people you encountered, or I mean, even you know, hotel staff, or someone in a market? I mean, I don't know who or what, but certainly you have experiences in dialogue with other people, and I would think you'd want to include some of that. Otherwise, you're writing text, and I think it will wear readers out. And yeah, if you're so solo, then you know why. Yeah.
Well, it's not so solo like that, but I'm thinking there's no one who's traveling along with me the whole time. So of course
Right.
I'm interacting with people in all these places, but I wondered what depth of dialogue the reader will expect. Do you know?
Okay, but again, I think the solo part is fine, but again, you're not alone still as you're traveling, and those people you meet, you know, whatever airport counter or whatever, just those little things, something that you picked up that just, you know, brings the reader there so they can, you know, feel, you know, what you were going through, or you know, some, you know, difficult situation, or you lost your ticket, or you couldn't find your passport. What did the visa officer say to you? And, you know, something that I would say that brings other people in, and it doesn't just bring them alive, will also bring you alive. Otherwise, everything's has got to be internal, right? Yeah, well, that's what I think.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I wouldn't call it a conundrum, but it's it's a fascinating project to take on. Hello, come.
We got Ruth Rogers is raising her
Oh,
hand.
oh,
Yeah.
hi, Ruth. Hi, hello.
Hi, how are you? I
Good.
was just wondering, how long did it take you to write your memoir? I mean, did you start, stop, think, reflect? What was
Yeah,
that process like?
forever. No, actually, I started it years ago, at least 10, and probably more like 15 years ago. And I can't say it was option, but I had a publisher, and I'd given a proposal and some sample chapters, and I was told it was brilliant. I quoting, and I thought it would have been published, but then the publishing house changed, and a new senior editor came in, and they dropped the project, and this is after inviting me to lunch and dinner and wine and things like that. I really thought it was going to happen, but it didn't, and I just put it away. I just said I, yeah, it's not that I didn't think it was worthwhile, but I went on. I was doing different things. But then I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, I decided this is something I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And I just went about it quite strategically. I hired the memoirist I mentioned, who's a good friend, but I mean, she's also a professional writing coach and an author, and gave me quite a lot of her time. And I thought of her as a book project director in a lot of ways. And then I went to a writers' conference, and which is something she encouraged me to do. And I thought, oh, why would I do that? But I happened to be in California when the Southern California Writers' Conference was happening. I think it was 2019 or 2018. And I decided to go, and it was a very worthwhile experience, because one of the things that you will find in conference, of course, you're in workshops all of the time, and reading your work and discussing with other authors, but it's an opportunity for you to vet your writing, your project, and because up until that time, I'd shown the manuscript to others, and if you show it to your mother or your best friend, they're going to say, "Oh, this is great. It's wonderful." But when you have it seriously evaluated, I think it's a good thing. And I am happy to report that I was actually awarded the conference nonfiction award for most outstanding nonfiction at the time. But yeah, I would say active writing, once I really got things rolling, with probably 2-3 years, something like that. Well, who's counting?
We got a few questions coming in from the chat. First one is from Alec. Did you keep a diary? If so, what was the process of turning the diary material into a memoir?
Yeah, no, I didn't keep a diary. And as I mentioned in the memoir, when I lived at Futokoroyama, Breast Pocket Mountain, I had a diary that I called Diary of the Mad Housewife, or the journal of the plague years, because I only wrote in it when I was depressed. And so and I wasn't depressed all of the time, so I'm happy to say there isn't much in that diary. But I did have some notes, things that I had written down that I could refer to. But actually, once I really started, I would say, really seriously focusing on doing the memoir, I didn't go back to those journals. And in fact, just a few months ago, I went to my infamous third drawer where I keep manuscripts, and was looking at some of those journals, and I was surprised to see what was in them. And in fact, I thought, oh wow, I should have taken it out. It might have helped with the memoir, but I had plenty of material, so. Yeah.
Another question we have from the chat. This is from Matt Alt. Can you expand on when you said applying structure turned a hard job even harder?
Yeah. Again, as I said, we're all adults. We've been alive a long time, and I'm sure no one here is as old as I am. But still, when you try to put that together, and to make it a story, to give it momentum, to make it dynamic, to make it interesting, this is where it gets difficult, because you can't just be, well, I was here, living in New York City, and then I went to Europe, and then I came back, and then I took this trip across the world or whatever. That is not, will not create structure, but actually making the connections, building on your theme. What would you say? Holding those things close that you really want to tell, but that continue to move the story on, to give it momentum. This is where the structure comes in, and again, because in memoir you can do something, as I said, like telegraph about something that happens in the future, contemporaneously. But that can also, and that can be a good thing. But if you're not, I would say, really, it isn't disciplined, but if you're not focused on how that is building your story, that can also, it can be a drawback. It can take away from the story. It's like, why is she telling me this now? What's the reason for that to be included here? And this is where I would say a developmental editor could be very helpful, and mine was, because she would tell me, well, that's great, that you're writing about this, but you're putting it in chapter 3. I could see it better working in chapter 10. And she was right, is all I can say. And again, you work with an editor. They're not calling the shots. You are, but still, you can get valuable advice in terms of imposing structure.
I'm going down the questions just in the order I receive them. So those of you who've raised your hands, I'll be getting you. I see you guys. I'll get to you in a minute. We've got another question from chat before that, though. This is from Jan. Is there a reason why you don't have chapter titles in the book?
Oh, it just got so ridiculous. I felt it's like, I felt it wasn't important, and I felt if I put in the chapters, then that chapter had to be about that, and sometimes it wasn't exactly. While I was writing, I did have chapter titles, and it helped me because it helped me to, I would say, focus and see where I was, and and where I was going. But I just felt it wasn't important for the finished work. And my editor also said, I could or could not, that it wasn't something that was necessary for it. Does the person who is asking think I should have had chapter titles?
That's me.
Jen.
Yeah. I received the book. I'm in Sydney, Australia. I received the book 2 days ago. The email told me that I was going to get it next week, and I was very pleasantly surprised when it arrived on my doorstep a couple of days ago. And I haven't had a chance to read it all yet. But yeah, I was interested in what you were saying about structure. And I'm also writing a memoir. And as you said, it's easier to write if you do have chapter headings as you're writing. Mm-hmm. But I did also think, no, I can see the flow and the open-endedness without the chapter title. So that was how I interpreted your decision. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Another question from the chat. This is from Catherine O'Connell. Without a diary, did you then also go to others for their recall of the event or incident to help aid you as you wrote?
Did I go to others? You mean as like for details?
I assume so. Catherine, is that correct?
Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Hi, Karen. It was,
Hi, Catherine.
yeah, hi. It was really about that because, I mean, you've got to rely on your memory. So it's very hard to remember everything that happened. But if you went to say your sister or your child and their recall of that event, did that help then remind you so that you could then write it more accurately, or did you not really do that till the end?
Yeah, no, I didn't really, and I think one of the things, and I think this is something one has to be careful about. I live here with my husband, and a lot of the story is he's in it, or he's part of the scene or whatever, but it's not his story, And if he told me too much about what happened, then that's what he saw, or what he experienced. And number one, he doesn't have as good a memory as I do, so he wouldn't really be the person. But I also found that, and as I mentioned, was it kind of held me back at one point when I originally started writing. There were some things that I couldn't remember, as I was saying, about when we drove to Tehran, to the border of Afghanistan. I was thinking, oh boy, and now of course, and I think actually when I started, I couldn't Google the information, how many kilometers are between Tehran, to Herat, and driving in a Volkswagen Bug. How long would that take me? I mean, it's like, is that really part of my story? I just didn't think that was so important. And the other, the parts where I'm writing about people, either my husband or my children. Yeah, I can say I am confident it was accurate, and as I said, they were able to look at the manuscript. It's like my own family that I was born into. There are no members left, so there's no one for me to check with that. So, but I didn't have to make anything up.
Okay, Beryl Hawkins has a question. Beryl?
Hi, Karen. How are you doing? Thanks so much
Good
for
to see you again.
inspiring us again.
And Cheryl too. Now I believe you're definitely writing a memoir.
Well, I just wanted to kind of go back before the memoir and just ask you about how has your writing career prior to that, working for the, being a columnist and all of that. How did that help to build your confidence or motivate you to actually take on this kind of project?
Right.
I know some of my other journalist friends have also come up with books around this time, and we're all kind of contemporaries. So that's what I just kind of wanted to know. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, one, my Japan Times column was, Kage-sama-de, very popular. And so, I mean, I knew I had an audience, even though I wasn't able to convince any publishers or literary agents about that. But I had, I guess, a certain amount of confidence in writing for the public, instead of, writing journals or keeping a journal or, sending out the occasional essays. I wrote columns on deadline for 15 years. And yeah, I felt I could write, and that I had, some preparation for doing it. Not that I think that's necessary. I mean, not everyone who's going to write a memoir, was also a columnist. But I did have that, I feel, in my favor. And because I had written so much, I also that's an archive, 15 years of having written two columns.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because I'm also a journalist as well, and I think part of my hesitation is that, well, I have all this experience, but it's taking that next step,
Yeah.
to actually write the book. So,
And it's different. It's not writing a book is not writing a column or columns. Yeah, it is different. So.
okay,
We have
thank
two
you.
more.
Yeah.
Sorry, we have two more questions. I just want to make sure we get time to both of these. So Mark and Dave have a question.
Yeah, first of all, Karen, you said earlier that you write a good book is satisfying for you, the author, and for the readers. And
Yeah.
when you were writing for the newspaper, you're targeting people here, basically in Japan, who read the Japan news. Who were you targeting with this book?
Yeah, I was targeting you and her.
Yes.
Yeah, really. This is one of the things that the first things that actually a literary agent and a publisher will ask you, who's your target audience? What demographic are you're trying to reach? And they also will say, don't say everyone. Well, my feeling is that, well, what the hell? I mean everyone. I absolutely mean that. I'm not trying to target teenagers or, what would you say? I wasn't writing children's literature or something like that. But really, everyone. And I can tell you, now, the book has been out for a year, it's been well received. And I hear from men and women, young and old, from, we have an Australian person here, we're from Australia, from New Zealand, from someone in China. I heard from someone, I think he was in Egypt, from people all over the States, all kinds of ethnicities. And I feel like I did the right thing. or not even the right thing. I did what I wanted to do, and I'm very satisfied with that, really.
There's one more question from the chat. I think this will be the last one because we're.
Oh, really? It can't be over so soon. Too bad.
Which is better, writing memoir in one long story or splitting it to some short stories that focus on the most appealing ones? And this is from Kartika. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I see your name there. Yeah. I mean, you can write it as stories, but if you want to publish it, then I guess you would publish it as discrete stories or vignettes or whatever. But if you're writing it as a memoir, again, you want the narrative flow, and it might help you to get it down to write it, separately as stories. But in the end, they've got to come together. You would have a book, but I don't think you would have a story. But that's definitely also one way to approach it. Writing separate essays. I happen to love the essay form, and I think I could have written my memoir as essays, but I'm glad I did it in this way.
Okay, well, that's the end for this session. Karen, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for all your questions. Please, everyone, give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
And the next session,
hi, Todd.
will be 3 o'clock. Melinda Joe, you want to be a food writer. All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you all.